Hello, everyone. A very warm welcome to all of you who have tuned in today on this lovely Sunday evening to the second day of the Chandigarh Literati 2021. We are now beginning with the second module of the day today, which is the online session, and I'll dive straight into it. It's my absolute pleasure to be in conversation with an author who uses intrigue of the human mind the most. Maybe that's why she takes an affinity to filmmaking. A filmmaker, and she loves to sing and play old Indian songs on the piano and guitar. Welcome, Vandana. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Swati. Thanks very much.
And we're going to be talking about Vandana's latest book, Hinge. And Vandana, while emotional wellness is a subject we all have started to address openly thanks to the pandemic, what was the thought in your mind when you penned Hinge?
Well, Swati, I've been keeping notes on the mind and brain and patterns for a long time because one of the first films on clinical depression in an urban Indian context was a film that I made in 2002. It was on major depression. And
Right.
subsequently, I made a film even on anger, which was an international documentary. So a lot of what for the book also came from the research because I'd met with so many experts all over the world.
Right.
But an inherent interest, the reason I wrote Hinge was because it seemed to me that we are constantly talking about progress
Hmm.
and alluding to it, as if we're progressing in every sphere of our lives. And I don't think that's true. I think, we may be progressing outwardly, and that too, I think, is open to debate. It depends on what we mean by progress. But in terms of our
Absolutely.
own inner fabric, it seems to me that we might be taking many steps back, and
Hmm.
that was of concern. So I wrote Hinge to highlight that, to bring attention, to call attention to the inner world. Our lives are an interplay between the external and the internal. And
Absolutely.
it seems to me that to be aware of what's going on internally, to understand emotions, helps immensely. That's my experience. And so it was many years of research and notes and interviews that came together in Hinge.
That sounds wonderful. And it seems like this is a subject that is very close to your heart.
It is indeed. I think actually, as a lived experience, uh, one is constantly negotiating questions of, how much of this emotion must I ride with? How much of this emotion is okay to express? Is it okay to dwell in anger? How much? Is it okay to be kind? How much? These are questions which are constant. And
Absolutely.
Hinge, in some way, I hope at least, tries to throw light or bring into perspective where do we root ourselves? What kind of approach should we have to be able to better negotiate or better calibrate our response towards the external.
That's lovely to know. And Vandana, the book is divided into three sections or phases, so to speak, that drive our emotional arc. The first part is called normal, where you speak to a social fabric that impacts our well-being. I'm sure our audience would like to hear more from you about these norms and the conformity and the bearings it has on us as individuals.
So, it becomes important, at least it became important for me to talk about normal precisely because unless we understand what we mean by normal, how do we define things which lie outside normal? And also, normal is very relative. So, what
Correct.
is normal for you is not normal for me. It
Absolutely.
depends so much on social, cultural context, especially in the environment in which we spent our early years, our formative years. Uh, so normal, therefore, is, as I said, a very relative concept. And uh, what is also important is that, to my mind, in my observation, if normal is extremely rigid and has a very defined structure, then it can actually prod disquiet. It can be the very cause for disquiet in individuals who may otherwise be, congenitally well, who maybe, who may not have any emotional turmoil. So it therefore became extremely important to talk about normal, before going into what could be emotions of distress, and then, of course, coming back to how do you hinge yourself back internally? How do you gather yourself back? How do you center yourself again?
And I have this big smile on my face because when you said, you know, normal is very relative, and people who are typically set in their way of thinking could have a lot more disquiet. I know of so many people these days who work off tasks list and who have to-dos, and they have a plan on a page of where they want to be 3 months down the line, 5 years down the line. And I'm sure that can create a lot of disparity when things don't go as per plan, because life has its way of throwing curveballs at us.
Indeed, in fact, a lot of disquiet comes quite naturally when your aspirations are not met. So it becomes important, therefore, to, while formulating your aspirations, to be uh, pretty conscious of what are the resources that are available to you. And in that context, recently, a friend of mine told me about this quote by Arthur Ashe. Actually, my husband Rajat, he told me, and Arthur Ashe was this tennis player who said these three lines, and I think so much of our philosophy, or so much of what we want to do, actually comes from that clarity. Um, he said, start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can.
Absolutely.
So I'm saying this because when, anger, for instance, comes from thwarted expectations, from frustration often. Of course,
Absolutely.
anger also comes from fear. And as you probably know, the two primary emotions that on which almost all our emotions are based on are either love and fear. It's not love and hate. Hate actually has fear behind it. So love and fear are the two primary emotions. And so, anger comes from fear, anger comes from frustration, anger comes from your expectations not being met, anger comes from a loss of control. And so I feel that when we are formulating our aspirations, uh, a little bit of that, of our consciousness, should be aligned to the fact that things may not go how we want them to go exactly, and therefore, then what would be our response? If we do not calibrate that, then our response will be more of a reaction, and
Absolutely.
that just makes us more taut. It makes us more tense. It makes us more difficult to be with, not only around others but for our own sakes and for our own selves. And when the internal is in tumult, then everything is out of whack.
I couldn't agree more. And at this point, I think it would be very relevant to just let our audience know what Kiran Mazumdar Shaw has said about your book. And she says that Vandana Kohli very eloquently analyzes the casuality and manifestation of mental disorder in Indian society through her deep understanding of social structures that create complex emotional and psychological conflict and distress. She explains how accepted tenets of normality can often unhinge us, and yet we have it in us to get back to equilibrium with a little help from friends and our own inner voices. A wonderfully thoughtful book for everyone to reflect on. And quickly jumping into the second chapter or the second phase of the book, which is called Unhinged. Most of us are wired, Vandana, to react in a certain way. So much so that people close to us can almost tell our exact response to a situation. The second section of your book, Unhinged, reasons on how we deal with our emotions. Why do you think we need to be aware of such triggers, and perhaps what could they be?
Well, Swati, the second section is unhinged because it delves into emotions that can do that. They can cause distress, extreme distress, which is why I call it unhinged. Why is it? And it basically talks about the arc of those emotions. How do you, it tries to bring alive the intensity of those emotions. So, depression, for instance, we hear the word so often these days, but how does it feel to be depressed? It's very difficult for a person who is undergoing depression to make even his own or her loved ones know exactly what's going on within. So, Unhinged actually tries to do that. It tries to give a more lucid picture or a lucid experience, if I may, of how it feels to be depressed. What are the different the different pulls and pushes that are happening? How's the mind working? How's the body reacting? What's going on at the emotional plane? And is there a sense of loss? Yes, there is a sense of loss. There's a less sense of loss in time. There's a sense of loss in opportunity, and this is like going on at such a strong. The intensity is just it's very very intense. And then of course it goes on to analyze from a bit of a perspective, what that means. So I believe that it's a breach in your internal fabric. Literally, depression causes that breach, and then it goes on to explore the emotion of anger. Now, why do I talk about depression and anger, and to bring it one down to one word, which I feel is resistance? The moment we are angry, the moment we are anxious, irrespective of what somebody is saying to us, our first reaction, quite involuntarily, is one of resistance, in the mind. So,
Right.
so Unhinged speaks about all that for the simple reason that if we are aware that this is how the emotion works, this is the intensity of it. Even as emotions are relative, I do believe that there is an arc that each one rides. Then we'll be in a better position to be able to handle ourselves through it, to be able to see ourselves through them more consciously, and soften the impact of them on us. And one other thing why I talk about these emotions is often when people are going through a very intense emotion, they feel, this is probably only happening to me. I'm the only one who's feeling this way. And to
Yes.
know that, maybe it's not so much just you, but it is also the emotion. It is the ride of that emotion which is making you feel this way. This is how it works. This is how it works in you. This is probably how it works in the other person as well, give or take, of course, your own, each one's unique experience. But at the same time, this is what it is prodding. This is what it is. This is how it is impacting us. This is what it is pushing us to do. This is how we're going to feel when we're immersed in it. So just to know that can be extremely cathartic. That it is not
And
just not just me.
absolutely, and I'm really glad we are having this conversation today because I wonder how many of us are actually able to recognize these emotions within us. Forget getting down to the root causes of it. How many of us actually can differentiate whether or not we are in a state of anxiety, perhaps, or in a depressive state of mind, or somebody close to us is leaning on that side of the fence. So
Precisely,
I'm
precisely. Precisely. Also, because it's not just necessarily you yourself, but it's also to be able to recognize that and understand that in relatives, in close family, in friends, in colleagues, which is why Unhinged talks about all these emotions. And as you rightly said, when as you read it and you think, okay, this is exactly how I feel, it hopefully gives one a perspective and puts that slight distance, that slight space between the emotion and between one's consciousness. And so what happens is, quite by default, then, because that space has come in, one is in a slightly better position to handle it, to use, to make its energy useful.
absolutely.
Every emotion, even the so-called, I refer to them as dark emotions, only because I feel that uh, when we delve in them too much, they do not empower us. They can take away from us. Like if you're stuck in anger, it can consume you. It can consume everything. It consumes you mentally, emotionally, even physically, because the effects of anger, more and more we know, there are studies more and more to prove. that anger has some extremely profound physiological, has an impact physiologically. And we've known that for a very long time. People in mind science have known that for an extremely long time. You have older systems of medicine, for instance, or homeopathy, or maybe or Ayurveda, which know that you're going through a certain emotion, and that's the impact it's going to have on your body, and this is how it's going to impact the body. So having said that, then when one is aware of that arc, and moment a little bit of space comes between the emotion and the experience, one is able to make use of their intensity. And so, as I was saying, I call them dark emotions, but every emotion, uh, and the energy of every emotion is of use. We are hardwired with anger. It's a part of all of us, and it's there for a reason. The reason is that it has to spark us to injustice. When we see injustice, we're supposed to feel anger. When we are faced with any kind of threat, whether it's a physical threat, whether it's threat to our identity, whether it's threat to a certain, something that we don't want, where we don't want things to change, any kind of threat that we feel, does spark quite naturally anger in us. Is the fight or flight response. I've
Right.
talked about it very, very often, and there is a reason for it. There is a reason. So what? So Hinge is not propagating, even by that we mustn't experience these emotions. That these are emotions to stay away from. No, it is actually trying to throw light on how the emotion works, so that you're in a better position to say, what, this is becoming all consuming. Maybe I do not. Maybe this is an excess, and maybe I do really need to take a step back, not for anybody else's sake, but for my own sake.
Absolutely. And I would almost say that Hinge lies at the intersection of science and spirituality, Vandana. You just made a reference to Ayurveda and homeopathy. How and where did you draw your inspiration from?
Swati, when I was writing the book, I was not thinking of it like this at all. Hinge comes from a lot of research over almost 2 decades. It also comes from some amount of lived experience. I do talk about certain concepts from different philosophical thoughts, and since we are most exposed to the broader Indian philosophical thought, which is such a rich, it's such rich traditional knowledge. It offers
I
us a
couldn't agree
huge
more.
toolkit. So,
Yes,
to my mind, a lot of the concepts that we hear, a lot of the concepts that we actually know of, can be put to great use as a tool, in as a tool in helping us find a center, in helping us shift an approach. You know, the externals are out of our control.
right.
So, a few months ago it was the pandemic. Before that, it would have been something else. Tomorrow it's going to be something else. I mean, the external is constantly going to keep throwing challenges our way, and sometimes they're not going to be as momentous as a pandemic. It will be an individual challenge, and it's going to come every moment. So, Hinge really, I think, at its core, tries to throw light on the processes which can unhinge us when they are in excess. And also, how then do we gather and collect ourselves back in a way where we rediscover emotional and mental wellness? And so we
And
are in a better position.
just out of curiosity, Vandana, you mentioned that we can use certain tools to get centered again. Can you just to give the audience the example of such a situation where we can perhaps make use of the in-depth, the richness of the Indian culture, and some such tools that we perhaps can use in our everyday life to be more emotionally balanced.
Well, the third section of the book draws a lot on that, and the third section is called Hinge. So there's normal, unhinge,
Right.
and hinge. And one of the most persistent questions which plagues someone who is emotionally distraught, because you are emotionally distraught because of something that has happened. It could have been an incident. It could have been, well, usually an incident. It's something that has not
Right.
gone the way you wanted it to go,
Yes.
and so you get stuck at that point. And so one of the most persistent questions that needles you through and through is why. Why did this
Yeah.
happen to me? why me?
Yes.
And that why can just, I mean, it can open up a Pandora's box, because one wheel of the mind turns another wheel, turns another wheel, turns another wheel, and that one
And
why can
construes
lead you,
yourself as a victim.
my exactly, absolutely. My dad said this to me. In my childhood, this happened. That this lady said this to me. This teacher did that to me. I mean, there's no end to that Pandora, that gear mechanism. One wheel turning another wheel, turning another wheel, and therefore, one of the most effective tools that I have found is in the concept of the yin and yang, or in the concept uh, of bipolarity, because to understand that our realm, that this band of energy, this as you can use any word that you want, the planet Earth, for instance, or just the first natural law of this band that we inhabit is of bipolarity. Whatever there is its opposite, and there is a reason for that, because one actually gives meaning to the other. So as Hinge also says, and very quickly, if it was day for 24 hours. I mean, you would step out and it was day. You would come back and go back out again. It was day, and there was no, a change in the light of day. Then day would stop to mean, it would not mean anything. But because there is the cycle of day and night, and then day again. One actually gives meaning to the other. So night gives meaning to day. And similarly, so this band of energy, which is bipolar, and this is, science has said this, that any action has an equal and opposite reaction.
Opposite reaction.
So, whether we're looking at a concept or a law from a scientific point of view, or we're looking at from a philosophical point of view, for me, actually, the planes meet quite often. So, if there is bipolarity, then to understand that they're both going to find their way to us. So it's not, and these are not binaries. It's not like there is light and there is dark and there's nothing in the middle. No, it's an entire spectrum.
Correct.
And that entire spectrum is going to find its way to me. And whether I like it or not, my life is going to be a design from that very spectrum. And every shade of that spectrum may find itself to me in some kind of experience, in some kind of interaction, in some kind of thought. So it pierces through this why. And it's just that the moment that pierce happens, actually, that resistance, there is a dent in that resistance. And it is important that we begin to flow again. Because when you're resisting things, and when you're very tight and you're very taut and very tense, your internal fabric is very tense, then this whole movement towards flowing with what is coming my way, how do I work with the opportunity coming my way, how do I recognize what the resources that I have, how do I move ahead in my day, how do I take ahead my tasks and my aspirations. So all that comes to, it's like water being blocked.
Yeah.
So that then becomes important. And so there are different tools. To my mind, a lot philosophy, most of philosophy, or most of anything that you find useful, anything that is helping you dissolve inner resistance, is a tool for you, and is of use,
That's
is
very
therefore of
beautifully
use.
said. That's very beautifully said. Uh, Vandana, also I would be intrigued to ask you, how pertinent do you think mindfulness is in the current time and age? And in your view, which generation do you think would benefit the most from mindfulness?
And Swati, I think everybody benefits from mindfulness. Everybody. And it really doesn't matter at what point in your life you may practice it. It is a practice.
Correct.
It's also a buzzword. Mindfulness has become a buzzword. So, what
Yes.
exactly may we mean by mindfulness? I suppose just being mindful about what you're saying, being mindful about what you're doing, not being so caught up in something that there are blinkers and we're
Yes.
not able to see perspective. We lose perspective. Which generation may benefit most from it? My concern these days is more and more the generation that is brought up on screens. And
Like most of us.
I don't mean to belittle the technology completely, because we are having this conversation which wouldn't have been possible without the
Right.
technology. It's great. It's wonderful technology. It's great progress. At what cost? I
The
mean, that's a
rains and the
different
moons.
debate. Yeah, well, but if it's going to be all consuming, and if it's going to draw you into the extent that your mind is all cluttered with just what's going on a screen, and you're just interacting through a screen, there's no real interaction, there's no real interface with between people and situations, and your whole body is just bent over a screen, then I think it's difficult to be mindful.
That's true,
It's
and
you're stuck
definitely
into.
that, and especially when you are so tuned in to be always thinking, you don't want your mind to be unoccupied because that makes you feel like, again, a very buzzword FOMO, the fear of missing out. Oh, how many likes did I get, or what review is going on Insta? So you very rightly said, I think the millennials, or the people who are super exposed to technology perhaps are the ones who every now and then need to just step back a little bit and stop and smell the roses, perhaps.
Yes, and the more we can make that happen, the better it is for everybody, because we're going to grow old and older in a world, which may be too caught up with odds with screens. And also, as Hinge also says, that we are designed to move. Our bodies are built for movement. And so, if you're not going to get up and move, you're not, playing a sport, you're not walking, you're not running, you're not dancing, anything that catches your fancy. You're not doing a little bit of yoga. You're not running around for your errands. You're just calling staff or just being online. Then there is going to be some kind of disbalance, because physical fitness, you know, is mental, emotional, and physical fitness. I don't think you can segregate them completely. They're not independent, completely independent of each other.
Yes.
In fact, they are very interdependent. So yes, so I think we should be stressing more and more, the importance of movement in a real way, and putting a limit to screen time. I know this sounds. I'm sure this will sound awful to to all the young people,
No,
but it
I'm
becomes
sure
a
most
real
of the
concern.
parents who have tuned in to our conversation today couldn't agree more.
Well, it's also,
The
yes,
limiting.
I would certainly hope so, Swati. But I also think that sometimes parents are overwhelmed, and giving a screen
Yes.
to a child is an easy way out. I do feel that, I don't think little children have any business being on a screen, unless of course they're learning, and there are parents who actually monitor screen time and say, okay, only half an hour you can be with your iPad and no more than that, or 1 hour you can be with your iPad, and no, and I think that's very wise, because you take a device or a gadget away, or a screen away from a child who's hooked to it, and he or she behaves like you've taken alcohol away from an alcoholic. The tantrum is, it's taken me aback so many times when I've seen that happen. So,
Yes.
and that's a matter of great and grave concern.
Absolutely, and I couldn't agree more with you. While we say, we're living in this virtual world where Zoom and Teams are the norm, but yeah, I think a burnout from these virtual sessions also tends to happen, and we need to watch out for those trigger factors, and perhaps be equipped to deal with it more effectively. And
Yes, I
just a
hope. Yeah,
yes,
please.
Vandana.
No, exactly. I mean, that's exactly the reason for Hinge, as you said, to be able to deal with the inner more effectively and efficiently. And this is it's how do you deal with an emotion, or how do you manage an emotion more efficiently? It sounds like, is it possible to do that? And I think yes, it is quite possible to do that. The moment you understand how an emotion works, not just in you but in
That's the
others
starting
around
point.
you, yeah, it's starting. But quite naturally, you're in a better position to deal with it more efficiently.
And just for the benefit of our audience, I would like to pull out another review of Hinge and share it with everyone. Uh, so Cyrus Mistry says that mental and emotional health is probably amongst the biggest challenges we face today and in the foreseeable future. And Vandana Kohli's Hinge addresses simply and elegantly the complex work of emotions to better understand their cause and effect. The suggestions it offers are of value to make Hinge an engaging and enabling read. So that was a lovely review from Cyrus Mistry. Vandana, and just as I can see, we are coming to a close of our session. As an ending note, would you like to share with our audience, as a reinforcement perhaps, of why our holistic well being is important, uh, not only to tide us over the COVID times, but something to ride on with the journey of life?
Well, Swati, I think every element is important. I don't think one can ignore any of the layers within us. And often mental health is, I think, a very strong term because more and more I would feel we need to talk about emotional wellness, because
Absolutely.
any kind of mental, not illness, but any mental health problem or begins with you being emotionally distressed.
Correct.
Whether it's for companies to look out in their employees and to monitor what kind of work environment they are giving, whether to be corporate policy, whether, and it all begins at home. In any case, it begins
Of
with
course.
what's going on around us and what's going on within us. I don't think actually we can do too much too suddenly, but what we can do, because the external is out of our control. However much we may feel that we are in control, often it's an illusion. The only thing that can be in one's control, really, to some extent, or can begin to be concretely in one's control, to take a concrete step towards that, is the inner self, because only we know what's going on. Only you know what's going on within you. Only I know what's going on with me. And I think what Hinge tries to do is to turn one eye within. That life is an interplay between both what's going on outside as well as what's going on inside. It's not just external, it's not all internal.
Correct.
And how therefore how are we able to use to keep things in, not balance again. I often say, when we say balance, we think of this very precarious line and of this one-legged balance that you need to balance yourself on. Not at all. When I say balance, actually I mean more the center. And the center for me, and as I describe in Hinge also, is a point, the center of the circle. So irrespective of what experience is coming to you, what shade of experience that has, you're at a point, more or less, or at least you're trying to be at a point where it's all equitable. And I don't mean that suddenly everything becomes equitable to you, and you're not able to participate in joy joyfully, and you're not being able to recognize darkness or anger. I mean, but it does just that vision of trying to be the center, I think, is a great step forward in being able to have perspective of the entire cycle, of the entire spectrum, from dark to light, and all the shades of gray in the middle. And that just puts one in a better position to be able to handle it, to be able to move on, to be able to flow on with life, rather than get stuck. So pardon me, I think I meandered from your last question. I can't quite remember what you asked me, but
Reinforcement of why being centered is so important, not just to tide through the pandemic, but even otherwise, because like you have been telling us throughout, that life is going to throw the challenges at us in some shape or form, um, as long as we're breathing. And yeah, that's what we wanted to know from you, Vandana.
yes, absolutely. And centered for your own sake. You don't want to be pulled here and pulled there all the time. And the one thing I found most important when I was writing, for my own sake, for my own experiences, how much of my heart should I use? Everyone is saying that, efficiency, management, you got to be tough, you have to do this. You're great. I understand that, especially in your work, not just in your work, but in all your situations, in all your interactions. It is important to be able to find space for the expression of the heart. Our hearts, the layer of the heart, I don't mean really the physical heart, but the layer of the heart, it holds an inherent instinctive warmth. And more we are finding it difficult to be able to express it. If you express it,
Yes.
you think that you're being foolish. So where do you root yourself to be able to make use of all that resource, to be able to keep the warmth of your heart and at the same time be efficient and effective in the real world at a practical play. And Hinge tries to bring that together, and then therefore Hinge talks about the self. So I can't say more only because that's the reason I wrote the book. That you could that one can read a little bit and reflect on it. Hopefully, it's an easy read. It's more. It has a lot to do with stories, and also it's a yeah. It's a lived experience. A lot of it is a lived experience, and a lot of it is actually a practice. It's a reminder for the things that we can practice in little ways in our lives every day, which can hopefully take us closer and closer to inner equilibrium.
That's lovely to know, and I'm sure it's easy for anybody who is a reader, and especially somebody like me, to be able to relate to things that have happened to people, perhaps, and to be able to recognize those situations in my day to day life as well, and be able to deal with it. So I think definitely Hinge is uh, a book worth picking up on the way and strumming through it just to get pointers on things perhaps that we already know, but things sometimes that we need to remind ourselves of constantly to keep us centered, so to speak. Because I heard this quote and would like to share it with everyone that life is like riding a bicycle. To maintain your balance, you have to keep moving forward. And on that note, Vandana, it was such a lovely discussion to have with you on a topic I think we all at a certain level are dealing with. Uh, the intensity can vary, but I'm sure we all are dealing with this in our day to day lives. Uh, the question, the ask here is to be able to recognize this and to be able to evolve and exhibit resilience. Any parting thought, Vandana, from you for your audience?
Um, well, I think I've said pretty much everything that I'd like to say for now. I do want to say that though, when we say mental health, it seems like this really heavy thing to negotiate. I think Hinge tries to break out of that, which is why it's written not simplistically but simply, and I hope to make it accessible to everybody. And I hope that whoever reads it feels that way.
I'm sure. And thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in today for this conversation with Vandana. I hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as I enjoyed speaking to Vandana today. And Vandana, thank you so much for being a part of the Chandigarh Literati 2021.
Thank you, Swati, for moderating it, and thank you, the CLS and everybody behind it, and the organizers for choosing Hinge to be a part of CLS. Thanks very much.